Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at an NES game called Puss in Boots: Perrault's Great Adventure. It was developed by Shoei System and published by Electrobrain, and it was released in 1990. So it's an action platformer that is based after an anime film, and that anime film happened to be The Wonderful World of Puss in Boots. Now I have not seen this movie, so I can't really say an opinion on it, but all I know is that it's an alternate take on the story of Puss in Boots. So anyways, let's go talk about the story. Now in-game it actually doesn't explain the story at all, but the only way you would know the story is if you had the manual for it, which I don't, but thankfully I was able to find it online. So here is the oh so wonderful story. So it begins with a character named Count Grumont who is a pig. So he happens to discover a mouse inside his castle and he hates mice and wants to kill it, but he's too lazy to do it himself, so he ends up hiring a cat named Perrault, which is, as you know, Puss in Boots. So Perrault ends up befriending the mouse, and instead of killing him, he lets him escape freely. So because he spared the mouse's life, Count Grumont is very upset with this and he feels like he's being betrayed. So he ends up hiring a scientist who happens to be a wolf named Dr. Garigari. I have a feeling they got his name from the movie The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I mean, it sounds pretty similar enough. So what Dr. Garigari does is that he ends up sending Perrault back in time somehow. So now Perrault has to get back to his main timeline. And that's all I have to say about the story, and well, yeah, it isn't really the greatest thing ever. But considering that it doesn't even explain the story in the game, it's kinda whatever. But I figured I'd mention it just in case, people were curious about it. So now let's move on to the gameplay, and like I already said, it's a platformer. So all you have to do is get from point A to point B, and sometimes at the end of point B, you'll have to fight a boss. Now to add some variety to the game, they actually made some vehicle stages, such as driving a boat, driving a car, flying a plane, flying a hot air balloon, and some other ones. And you have different ways of attacking, such as using your gun, using your boomerang, and using some bombs. And there are 7 levels within this game, but all the levels are very short. The only level that is kinda long is the last level, and it also happens to be the hardest, because I have to say this game is also very easy and also very short. But the last level can be a pain in the ass, especially the boss. And that's really all about it for the gameplay. Yeah, it's a very simple game, but sometimes I feel like it's almost too simple, mostly because the level design in this game is very plain. With the exception of the last level, where it's like a maze where you have to go through a bunch of doors and avoid traps. Or all the other levels are very straightforward. But I will give them some credit that they were trying to make some good variety of using the vehicle stages, and even those levels are very straightforward. So all I have left to say is that the game is very easy, very simple to understand, and it's also very short. I mean, I can get to the last level within like 20 minutes. But you gotta keep one thing in mind is that there was a lot of games around this time that are not very long. Or sometimes it can just be a game feeling short, because if you're good enough at a game, you can actually beat it very quickly. But it would be a nice touch if they did add a couple more levels. And obviously I'm not trying to compare a game like this to a newer game that is very short. Now I don't want to get too much off track here, but there's a really funny story I wanted to tell. So in one of the gaming groups I used to be a part of, this was around the time when Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes came out, and there was this one guy who was constantly defending it. I guess he must have been a Metal Gear fanboy or something. So he made a very ridiculous sounding argument like, "Ooh, you hate Ground Zeroes for being short. Well, does that mean that you have to hate Contra too? Because that game you can beat very quickly." It was something along those lines, and honestly, it was just too idiotic. I mean, for one, if you're trying to compare a game on the NES that doesn't really have much of a story, I mean, all you do is just run around and you shoot things, to a game that was not only released at a completely different time, but a game that has a lot of story but just happens to be very short. So if you're comparing the two in that way, it just doesn't work at all. And secondly, now it is true that you can beat Contra in a very fast time. Not everyone is a fucking game master. And Contra is a very tough game. I myself can't beat it, but I've at least got very far through it, and I know plenty of other people that never beaten it. I mean, the only way you can actually beat it very quickly is if you're good enough at the game with enough practice. But like I already said, not everyone can do that, or at least not everyone can do it all the time. So that's all I have to say about that whole thing. So it's really just another piece of evidence to tell you that fanboys in general are pathetic. Whether they're obsessed with a certain game, a movie, an anime, a company, or even a platform, whatever the case is, they're pathetic. So now that we're back on track, the only thing left I have to say about the gameplay for Puss in Boots is that it's simple, it's easy, and it's short. But maybe it is that way because this game is targeted towards kids. I mean, that is a possibility after all. So anyways, let's move on to the controls. I think the controls in this game are not bad. So when it comes to jumping, shooting, pausing, switching weapons, and even walking around, it's all easy stuff. But I do find that the walking is pretty slow. It actually has the exact same issue as the Fist of the North Star game. And it also has that really weird idea that you can just like jump really high, and when you do that, it actually goes back faster. Yeah, it's a very weird mechanic for sure. And as for the vehicles, well, it is very easy, but I do find that the hot air balloon feels very stiff. But other than that, everything else is just plain okay. I just find that the walking and the jumping is really weird. But I will have to say that at least the walking and jumping in this game is better than the ones in Fist of the North Star. So now let's move on to the graphics, and I actually think the graphics are not too bad. Everything is very bright and colorful, and at least you can tell what the hell things are. And some of the backgrounds look alright. But overall, there's not a lot I can say about the graphics, but at least they do look okay. So overall, it's not bad, but I think it could have been a little bit better. Now, as for the music in this game, I find the music in this game is alright. Now, I don't mind the way how most of the songs sound, but I do find that a lot of them are not very memorable. But I have to say, I really do like the music in the last stage. I find it sounds really catchy. So overall, the music in this game is not bad, but it's definitely not the greatest thing ever, but it at least does have a pretty catchy song. Now before I move on, one thing I would like to say that has to do with the audio is that they actually reuse a lot of the same sound effects from Fist of the North Star. Now wouldn't that be funny, hearing Puss in Boots saying a bunch of watas while he punches people? Anyways, it's pretty common that a lot of game developers will reuse sounds, but I just find this one to be pretty amusing for the most part, so I just had to say that one. So now, if you want to buy this game usually costs about $8 to $12. Usually it's around there, but I have to say, I don't see this game very often in my area. Yeah, it's one of those games that you don't see too often, but it's very cheap. Or unless maybe it's just my area, but either way, the game is still very affordable. Now, if I were to rate this game, I think I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Now, this game is pretty damn average, but the reason why I'm giving it a 6 is because I gotta give it some credit for at least having some variety. And sure, even those vehicle stages aren't the greatest thing in the world, but the game is at least playable. And yeah, the game is very easy and pretty much provides no challenge whatsoever, except for the ending, of course. But if you look at it in a perspective that it's supposed to be a game targeted towards kids, it's actually not bad. Now, the reason why I say this is because there's a lot of games that are based after like kid shows, and usually they're either crappy and broken, or just bullshit hard. But this game for a kid would actually be pretty easy to get into. But obviously I'd rather much give them a game like Super Mario Bros. But I have to admit, for a game that is actually based after something and it's for kids, you can definitely do much worse than this. But as for playing it as an adult, well, it's very easy. And it's nowhere near fantastic, but it's at least playable, and for some reason, I don't mind it. Now yeah, the whole jumping and walking thing could have easily been fixed, and also just having an overall better level design. So all I have left to say is that it's an alright game, surprisingly. Nothing horrible, but also nothing amazing. Now before I end this review, there's actually one other game I have to talk about. There is a game that actually came out before this, that is Puss in Boots related, but it only stayed in Japan. And that game happened to be called Puss in Boots: An Adventure Around the World in 80 Days. Now maybe someday I would like to talk about that one, but we'll have to wait and see. But I decided to do this one first because it was the one that got released over here. But all I can say about the Famicom game is that it does seem like it does play differently. So that should be interesting, and you never know, maybe it might actually be better than this one. So that's all I have to say about Puss in Boots on NES, and well, it's an okay game, I guess. So with that being said, that's the end of this review. So, I hope you enjoyed it, thank you for watching and commenting.